Hello. So this is my attempt of starting to introduce this epoch and my analysis, my thoughts, my context with it. I'm actually not 100% sure how to do this in the best way. Maybe a brief word for the audience. The internet and YouTube is full with commentary topics about the Second World War from researchers, from different interest groups, from different propaganda viewpoints, and so my kind of those videos are probably mainly for me and maybe my family or people who come after me to see the viewpoints of an individual who has some sort of closer connection to this huge topic. Even I'm not sure how to name it best. This topic: Nazi Germany, the Third Reich, or the Second World War. I kind of currently attend to Nazi Germany, even though it's a term, at least in my field surroundings, not used that often. Though my current kind of reading and understanding of this topic, it's probably a good way to differentiate this topic from other things, but cannot be received. So in this first video, I just want to give an introduction, where I'm coming from, which material I have gone through, seen, maybe a brief overview what I might do with this topic. Of course, everything is very time restrained, so actually I'm not sure how often there will be follow-up videos, or in which way kind of I will analyze other topics, even though I really like the idea of having a history channel and going through different things that are of interest to me. And I'm not sure, it's still a newer medium, so it definitely will be interesting for me to look in 5 or 10 years, kind of what was the thinking, where where I and how things developed. So I will see. So maybe just a quick overview of what I have. So I have a few unstructured notes, some books, some other things. Probably, if I would have had more time, I probably would given this video more thought, organized all the things, and edited it probably. But as I have very little time, it's already Saturday, 7 minutes past midnight. I probably just not sure if it will be 20 minutes, half hour, or how much time I will need to go through this, to just to express my thoughts and to just capture them, and then just leave it there for the time being. All right, okay, so my background, I was originally born in Germany, in East Germany, and thinking back when I was introduced first time into the topic of Nazi Germany, the Third Reich, or the Second World War, was actually when another kid from my village actually had to explain to me what a swastika is. So, and interestingly, we were standing in front of the house, where the only house in the village where there was a memorial plate of people who were falling from this house, were falling in the war. And the house had a kind of a patch of sand in front of it, and he drew there and then kind of, erased it afterwards. So yeah, this was my first introduction that there was a topic which was different to any other topics to talk about. Basically, you had to show something quickly and then forget about it. And I'm actually not sure when I spoke for the first time about this topic with my parents. Probably in school books, I still remember some pictures from the kind of glorious Red Army, kind of freeing or liberating the oppressed countries with great propaganda pictures. Kind of there was this official account in the schools. Then kind of I knew because I came to kind of my memories come from the time when I was like 12 and upwards. So I don't have too much memory prior to this time. So there was kind of this different streams of presenting this topic. So there was the official account in schools. Most people don't spoke about it. Of course, I was asking my parents. My dad spoke a tiny bit about it. My mom was didn't say much about it. I will come to my mom's side a bit later. And then there were also those streamings of neo-Nazis, or they call them neo-Nazis, but basically were like just kind of right-wing punks or just normal youth rebels, didn't want to go with the establishment, shaved their heads, had big army boots with white shoelaces and stuff, and they're having like smaller fights with the left side of the school, but people mingled, and so yeah. So my introduction to this topic was, so those were the school books. I changed school quite a few times before I left kind of the upper school. They had a very good newspaper. For me, it was a good newspaper shop, not just only regular things about music, but they also had things about history, war. So I got introduced kind of to this propaganda, kind of, it's like a war romance about the Second World War. Nothing critical all the time, nice descriptions, some fighting, some blood, but no atrocities or nothing too critical, like more like a good light. Yes, those were the good times. We had to fight. It was hard. It was a fair fight. Unfortunately, we lost kind of those things. Of course, lots of propaganda, like from the from the Wochenschau, pictures like this. Like all the time, good action. Of course, injuries and things would be described, but not in a good manner. Especially like here in the back, you see, all the time, good heroic fighting, and some of the analysis I did recently kind of showed this style of reporting was actually created, still stems from the time of the Third Reich. It didn't go away. It's still there. I actually, if I have the time, I don't know, I maybe have 50 or 100 of those kind of stories at home, and it would be actually interesting for me to pick out some of them, to see actually where they were on the battlefield, what was happening, kind of how many things were omitted, and maybe also to find some examples where things are kind of blatantly just inventions and glorifications of war. But that's kind of just one of the many side topics, because this topic is so big. Um, so yeah, I erased the points I spoke about because the list is too big. Uh, Another thing I got introduced. So when I was young, I was kind of in the Protestant church group, and one of the kind of caretakers from us introduced me when I was about 15 or 16 to Rudolf Höss, just the conversation and kind of his role and if his soul was saved or not. Kind of, so I earmarked this topic and or this person, and actually just a day ago I finished the memories of Rudolf Höss. I probably have to listen to the first chapter because I had to jump over it. It was very boring, but then when he described his upbringing and thinking, and especially analysis of the prison system, guards, and everything related he had to deal with. Also, interesting account of the personalities he had to deal with, and of course, very, very much influence of his view. So interesting that he really thought that the number of people killed in the air raids was similar to people killed in the Holocaust. I actually don't have the full number in my head about bombing victims in Germany. I think it's about 600,000, similar to the bombing victims in Eastern Europe, which is actually one of those many interesting points. There are different topics which are brought up again over and over in Germany, but they're not put into context with other areas. So we know about Bomber Harris, but we don't put it into perspectives. Bombings of Kiev, Leningrad, and other places where also the civilian population was kind of eradicated and just yeah, blown to bits and pieces. Kind of topics like this, the comparison and kind of a more balanced viewpoint is actually something I want to highlight because I think there is still most of the work to be done to see things in perspective. Air raids is one topic. Other topic is what do you call it? Prisoners of war. I think now it's more or less clear how bad it was, the situation for, well, not how bad, but how comparatively mild the situation was for German prisoners of war and prisoners of war from, especially from Eastern Europe, the UdSSR. Can't really can compare them. Similar to how does Dick Lewis, the YouTuber, said it's the R topic. I probably also want to just call it the R topic towards a woman. People complain about what happened in Berlin, but it's not put into perspective. There are probably 10 times as much violence and misuse of women happened towards women in Eastern Europe, and it's interesting. Or yeah, it's just for me. I want to keep those points. So I mentioned the Lancer. I was semi-militaristic in my early youth, so I had lots of model armies, mainly from the Second World War. Lots of tanks, different models, soldiers, and also kind of I had some uniforms and things, but some boots, but mainly from the NVA, from the Eastern German Army, because it just was dissolved and lots of things were available. And what was interesting in my kind of circumstance was that for me, I kind of was drawn to the tragic of those events, and kind of the duty most people showed, at least which was shown uh, in my surroundings. Because after the reunification, there was a new kind of interest in the topic, or lots of things were opened, and suddenly it was politically allowed to say more positive things about it. Because I still find it quite ridiculous that Nazism is described as fascism, because during the time nobody said fascism, it was all the time Nazism, and just kind of because it fitted better into the worldview of let's just say it blend just say it how to say just say it without too much probably should cut this out, but I don't want to edit this video. Just to take the view from Moscow, because they saw it the way it was fascism. Everything had to be fascism, even though most Germans wouldn't identify with anything like this, because Mussolini and the Italian branch of fascism there may be similarities, but it also was very different in terms of its extremity, brutalism, and total envelopment of the nation, especially given that actually Italy was fighting off Nazi Germany, and there were many victims and in those stages. So this was kind of my second, or a big point I noticed from the old indoctrination from the GDR, and then kind of the opening up, kind of seeing things a bit more shiny. People were able to get lots of books about different topics. Of course, in the 90s, many archives were still closed. They're still actually, it's a topic I would be very interested in to know which archives are still sealed and until when, about which topics. Just recently, I heard that things from Hess, Rudolf Hess, were closed until 2017. I don't know actually what was the outcome from this. So would be would be interesting. So basically, when I grew up, I was introduced to the topic more from the point of view there's something you have to put up with. Everybody was doing their duty, and it was more all around the Second World War, and not kind of the time before, because I think the shock came even though the time during the Third Reich was already quite influential and different, and but what people had to endure during the kind of peace times between 33 to 38, kind of in comparison to the last years, from kind of almost war 38 and then active war from 39 to 45, was like nothing, Probably most people would have put up with another 100 years of oppression and bad situations prior to the war than what happened actually during the war. So so that's this one. So like I said, my father, he spoke about it, because my grandfather, he was not the active front soldier. He was behind the lines. He was from the textile industry, and he was kind of giving out uniforms, and he was doing stock taking and stuff. That was also, I'm not sure when I was introduced, and there's not much knowledge about it because my granddad, which I never met, he died when did he die? Like in the 60s or so, 60s or 70s. He never spoke about the war with his kids or with anybody. Probably mainly due to his involvement in the whole time. So because he was in the SS up to 33 or 34, and he survived. He had to hide for during the time of the long knives, and then of course he was kind of in disgrace during this time. Because yeah, it's actually one point which Richard Evans points out. I wasn't too aware of that the Protestantism in Germany was one of the biggest supporters prior to 33 of the Nazi cause due to moral point of views and kind of direction of propaganda. And I guess my granddad from my father's side came also from this angle, kind of some morality, certain nationalism, and also strong view, kind of how to run the country more authoritarianism. So yeah, so that's my father's side. My mother's side is more interesting because for a long time, probably until the 2000s, we never spoke much about it. And when something was mentioned, it didn't make sense to me because when my grandmother said that she will go to see the place she was born, it was Poland. Kind of, it was just probably discussed in a few sentences and never in much detail because there was tragic, and I never understood or wouldn't say not understood, but my mother, she was very pacifistic, and she is still very pacifistic and against war, and this whole time I didn't know why, because she never would say clearly, but once my grandma came out that she was a refugee, she had to leave basically Slovakia when she was 12, 13 or so, and 46 or 47, due to the job of the father or her father, my great granddad. They wouldn't, or they were not expelled straight away because they were producing. They were running a factory which produced components for electric facilities with the porcelain, and yeah, so basically there were certain people in Eastern Germany which couldn't leave straight away, so it was like double tragic because they had to experience the whole the big expulsion of the German population. First the invasion by the army, then the expulsion, and then also of course the oppression from the newly resettled Poles into this territory. And then they came basically a few years late into Eastern Germany, and of course there were already so many millions of other refugees for many years there, so nobody took interest, or there was not much how to say help for them, because it was just so many burdens were there. So kind of my grandma was, from my mother's side, was quite marked by this experience, and I think the shock kind of came through the generations, that you wouldn't speak about it. And I'm actually quite glad that my grandma opened up after 2000 about this topic. We went to the place where she was born. I was there twice. Unfortunately, I couldn't so far establish any connections to this area. Kind of learned of some kind of other people that stayed there with German connections. I have to see if it's basically it's Old Breslau. I think nowadays it's called in Poland Wrocław. And yes, interesting. My grandma, she was living to one of the concentration camps there, and of course she never knew as a kid what was going on. And just coming to terms with this is really it's difficult for everybody. Um, if you're kind of a bystander and you kind of put into, or you're basically um, eaten up by this vortex of violence and tragic, which was and hardship, which was happening to everybody from all sides. And of course, when my grandma was allowed and the rest of the family to leave the territory, um, they had their lives, but that's pretty much all there was. Actually, I have to ask her which things they could take, and the trauma which went through the generations through my mom and to me, not allowing me to go to the military, even though I had this very strong interest in it. I think it's just how to say, just shows kind of the results from what happened. Yeah, about 80 years ago in Germany. So yeah, that's the point from my family. Uh, I spoke about Rudolf Hess already, and so yeah, this topic. Why? Maybe some of the reasons why I want to talk about this topic, and why do I bring it up? So when I was, I think probably between 13 to 16, so I was quite interested in this topic, especially when I changed school. Probably for 1 year, I was reading daily those things. I was looking to some books. I reviewed some of the books, which kind of, luckily, just one or two turned out like pure propaganda. For instance, Schlachthof 5, or Slaughterhouse 5 from Kurt Vonnegut. Is read by many people and puts a very bad number of the bombing victims of Dresden into people's heads. And we're still dealing with it. I still remember, for instance, one time when I was sitting in Dresden with a friend, and it was around this time in February. It was a nice early spring day or late winter day, and suddenly some very smug-looking neo-Nazis walked past us, and only later when I realized, it's okay, it's the 12th, 13th, 14th of February, and they had a march kind of commemorating the huge number of victims compared to the actual ones. And this whole topic of giving wrong numbers and kind of overdoing it with victims, which comes from Goebbels' account. He just added a zero basically. I think back then they knew already it was only about 25 or something thousand victims. They just added another zero to make it way bigger, to have a proper, to say like another atrocity happened to the nation, even though it was different. So that's probably one big theme to figure out the lies to the reality to this topic, because there's so much said. And at the moment I'm going through a book. It's called Hitler's Children, and it describes the viewpoints from Rudolf Hess's son, kind of all the continuous conspiracy theories he was thinking about. And there's probably some, let's say, there was some beef, or is still some beef between the Allied powers towards Germany. What happened there really? Why was he locked up for so long? But it's probably, there's only a degree of things there than to the kind of more common narrative. It, kind of this topic also touches on the huge chapter, chapter of the Nuremberg trials, which is so far only listened to one book about it, and I have another one on the list. And it's ideally I would read all the statements and then also the statements in context what we know now, because also there were many lies presented. Many people claimed innocence. Probably one of the most remarkable cases is from Albert Speer, and how he managed to get through the trial without the full disclosure of his involvement in this time, and kind of whitewashing his participation, and kind of shrugging of shoulders of, oh, it's not my responsibility, I didn't know, and all those things. So kind of that's a topic that's reappearing over and over with this whole topic. So yeah. Then for a long time I thought this topic, Nazi Germany, or in general when I think about history, to figure out which time was like one of the darkest, where would have been the worst time to live in history, and often I think it would be probably in the 17th century during the 30 Years' War in Europe. But probably in terms of death count and hardship, it's probably more the time between 1939 to 40, or Germany to 50, with the war and all the consequences. Often we think people in the past were quite, how to say, not switched on, but this time Nazi Germany shows also the huge extent how people were not taking responsibility, and how things were going south, or on an unimaginable scale. Probably one thing that bothers me most about this topic, how lenient more or less everybody was after the time, like after when the war ended, because probably when the war ended, many things were not known what happened, and of course the Western and Eastern powers, they had already their agenda kind of going forward, and they wanted to leave the topic behind it. But in terms of shock, or kind of shock strategy, Nazi Germany used to expand that power, and kind of what came back. I'm still amazed how, of course, it's with a degree, how lenient the handling of Germany was after it. Of course, I haven't thought much about power structure of Europe for alternative scenarios, but it's just one topic. Knowing so many atrocities, what's called Timothy Snyder comes to mind. The listing of endless misery and atrocities which happened in the name of Nazi Germany back then, and today it's more or less incomprehensible. And what I know about human psyche, it's not surprising that certain people only can resolve to the mechanism of denial, because you just can't imagine, hundreds, thousands, millions of people being killed just because of policy or ideology. It's not. It's probably a thing most people can't fathom. And I was surprised when I was going through through the Nuremberg trials, when there was one paper about the war in the East presented, which basically planned for the starvation of I think 20 or 30 million of Eastern Europeans, deliberate starvation. So probably it resharpened my mind in terms of big kind of changes, or one of the most effective killers, which is hunger. Actually, I forgot which book it was. I have to look in my library. It was in the book about Stalin and Hitler from, let's just pull it up, Stalin and Hitler by Lawrence Rees. He speaks much about hunger. I never had to experience long-term hunger. Sometimes I'm fasting for a day or so. I think, yeah, I did one fast 5 days, which was not pleasant. But it's hard to imagine when this is policy for millions of people, and the kind of the collective enforcement of this. A bullet through the head is way more humane, or being gassed, than not having to eat for a year or so. Or like I just said recently, Poland had for many years just 600 or something calories per person. So it's starvation policy, and coming to terms with those things, kind of slow eliminations of large sections of population, it's incomprehensible how people, like you and me, were sitting there and think of it. Oh, let's do this. Let's just don't take everything away from them. And that's probably the how to say, the things I want to bring up and to talk about, and just to muse about it. So yes, so the worst time in history kind of is not the 17th century and times before, but probably last century, kind of this brief time between, at least in Europe, between 1938 to 50, where huge sections were destroyed and changed. Also, why this time is interesting, and I don't want to spend too much time in terms of long-term research on it, is that the Second World War marks a point in human history where I kind of would say it still was equal struggle between areas where kind of each empire or some or power unit had the chance to dominate the world, or where there was a balance between powers. But since the atomic age, we don't have this anymore. The conflicts nowadays are way different, and they will be decided way quicker than back then. You don't need to mobilize a whole army like Germany had to do. Currently, there are a few states which just need to press, figuratively speaking, a few buttons, and they can annihilate a whole, whole continents. Of course, it's this game theory. Kind of which repercussions will it have? It how quick will it go? In the past, things wouldn't have turned out so badly, I would say, in terms of weaponry inventions. You still could think, if a time would come up, like the Third Reich, to which area in the world could you migrate to avoid hardship or loss of life. And nowadays it's wherever you're on the planet, and you're not part of the elite with a bunker, you're pretty much done for if there's a new huge conflict. It's very sad, but it's more or less the situation, and yeah, it's still something I don't know how to come to terms with, so to say, but that's the world we live in. So I spoke a bit about the school. So yes, when I was in school, kind of the right had the upper hand. Rommel was like a favorite. Only in the last years I came across kind of more critical views of the accounts from Beck, Rommel, or like anybody who wrote a memory from this time, how much bias it is, or how much kind of, how many things are left out or not. So it's for many Germans, it's still a huge a huge area to work through to figure out actually who was lying in which way, leaving things out. Case in point is Speer. So yeah. What's also interesting from this time, technical inventions and loss of intellectual progress in Germany. Up to this time, like up to 33, Germany had still something left of the science community, and I still regret not buying a book 5 or 10 years, probably more 10 years ago, which was listing all the scientists which left Germany, which fields where they were working, and kind of what they did afterwards. Probably if I come across the book again, I will buy it, because yes, kind of just a brain drain is immense. And also interesting, Richard Evans points out the kind of the loss of German thoroughness, or the loss of rigor school education during the Third Reich was quite telling, due to different duties schools, universities had to take on. Especially, it was really interesting for me to see how many university courses kind of didn't got any students anymore, and kind of which fields were how to say, which fields were propagated, like especially medicine or some technology, but many many other things about literature or philosophy kind of lost a lot of interest or funding from the state. So, but interesting also, for instance, Konrad Zuse, one of the inventors of the computer, happened in Germany as well, but because of the Nazi way of thinking, they didn't recognize what it meant, and it was maybe also already too late in the war that it would make any difference. But kind of the way they got stuck in old thinking, especially by kind of ousting all thoughts from Jewish scientists. Yeah, that's just a big point. Which brings me also to another topic with which I also still struggle, which is the Holocaust, or the prominence and the center stage of this, basically the anti-Semitism. Of course, I heard about it, but it never sunk in fully to which extent it is. I was at the memorial in Berlin, which is interesting when you hear Germans talking about it. It's kind of accepted, it's there, but it's not really accepted. It's something from the Germans, because it's quite horrific. But of course, I also see issue with just kind of condensing down the time to only Holocaust. taking this book, the author also kind of has a huge emphasis of the Holocaust. And yes, it happened, but it was not just only 6 million Jews that died, but also probably a similar amount of just regular civilians. So it was very harsh on everybody. But of course, the policy against the Jews was one central point of Nazi ideology, and probably should take more a center point of understanding, or at least musing about this topic, because all the books I had in my early years about the Third Reich were mainly militaristic, and those things were not mentioned at all. There was the interesting Clean Wehrmacht, or not so clean Wehrmacht exhibition in the 90s. I actually didn't go to it, but I also took issue with it because it showed the participation of the Wehrmacht in the East, and knowing now the orders that were given or that were kind of thought out from Keitel and others prior to Operation Barbarossa, kind of make it more clear that it was a Vernichtungskrieg, that there was like a complete annihilation war towards the East. It didn't really matter, if Jew or not Jew, especially if you think about the hardship which was called in Belarus, undescribable. What happened there, which policies were followed there, and kind of which completely black-white thinking was put forward there. So so that's Holocaust. I'm still, and it's interesting, literature points it out, and I don't know which book it was, which described all the steps. It might have been in one of Richard Evans or Jan Kerscher's Hitler, where it goes through all the sources from the 19th century, papers of science from Russia and other things which were kind of accumulated over time and already there in extreme thinking prior to 1920, but then how it was put together and more became or got a concrete form through Hitler's anti-Semitism and this complete zeal against those people, which is which was basically the biggest downfall. I'm still amazed how this blindness actually led to the downfall, because the complete conviction that there's a conspiracy against the Germans by a minority and the that they took no steps of verificating how it actually is. It was all the time just in broad terms. Oh, the Jews. Actually, Richard Evans. I have a huge pile of books here. I have to pull out this book first from Emil Ludwig. He was a writer in the 20s, and he's nowadays forgotten. Thomas Mann is still widely known. That's why I bought this book, because I want to read about it and more from him. He was a opponent to Nazism. He also was a Jew, or came from a Jewish background. I think he was not a practicing Jew, but it didn't matter to the Nazis. If you had some interest, you just kind of, it was tough luck. Whatever you did or didn't do, Jew, you were through, and you wouldn't have any acceptance in the nation thinking from back then. And So yeah, that's probably a point for me when I revisited the topic this time, which crystallized out for me. Actually, why was I, or why I'm looking now into this topic again? Because of two reasons. Maybe first um, so my dad recently retired, and he actually wanted to also read some more about it. He also has some old Hitler biography. I think it's one of the from the French guys, and I just wanted to do with him in parallel, just to do something to yeah, to have a topic to walk through. And also recently, if you're on YouTube, you probably see Jordan Peterson a lot, and I'm not agreeing with his kind of slightly admiration of, especially of Hitler's personality, and excuses what he did, because um, Hitler is pretty much pure, more or less pure evil. Of course, things he did, there were some, I wouldn't say positive effects, but the world he left behind in 1945 uh, is quite different to the world we had 1938, so to say. And coming to terms with this is, yeah, it's still, I guess, one of our jobs, or things to do, to talk about it more balanced, not just kind of black white, which all the time bad if things are just in black white, but actually talking about black and white. Hitler was black and white. He was only completely this way or completely that way, or especially his view, like, we either completely win and we are the master race, or the Germans are like, they can be discarded into the dustbin of history, which is nothing is so black and white. And it took, unfortunately, many millions of lives to introduce, or to come to different exceptions of the reality. So yeah, basically, this Jordan Peterson, he has a long book list. Also, it includes history, but most of, or pretty much everything I saw about this topic is old literature, especially Shire's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And I wanted to listen to it, but then I thought, like, no, hang on, I want to listen to figure out first what's later, because history didn't stop, archives are opened, and a more balanced viewpoint, you know, emerged in the last, let's say, 40 decades, or sorry, 4 decades. And so my current plan is to go through quite a few more. I'm jumping now a bit back and forth between things I wanted to do. I have, I think, might be like 10 or 15 audiobooks I want to go through before I actually listen to the Rise and Fall. The Rise and Fall is also a really big book. It's 57 hours if you listen to it at normal speed. Currently, I'm doing most things almost double speed. And ideally, I would put this book into context of other things which I went through, but at the moment I don't have any time. I can just kind of go through the topic once, and then I'm probably going to comment on it, but I won't give it. I won't have the time to give it a thorough analysis. But that's just the situation. Is, at least, if I hope that when I come across people who come from this Jordan Peterson background, that I can give a more balanced feedback and point into some directions where people could learn more about specific point where which show the twisted way of looking into it, or the more or less non-critical maybe last word about Peterson, because I could go on about him, like some other people which are critical about him. It's one point of saying, oh, it was bad, but then not actually pointing out the things which were bad and kind of more admiring those things. Actually, often when I will speak about Hitler, I will just call him the Austrian man, because even though he liked, sorry about the noise, I just want to put up my feet here. He liked the German idea, but he was not a German. And so also the conflicts nowadays, not conflicts, but kind of the minute differences between different parts of Germany, especially Bavaria and the rest, probably come from that part of the history, because Bavaria was very open towards the far right wing militaristic viewpoint, and kind of taking on Hitler, and also crazy taking on the actual inheritance, and all the money and things, assets of Hitler are still there. And it's one of the topics I also want to explore more. How were those assets used, and what's the state there now, similar to IG Farben corporation, which is still around, not officially, or not like too much in the open, but it's still there. I heard it in many places. Maybe some more other things, how I came into contact with this topic. So when I was younger, in this slightly more militaristic phase, so I collected also like cartridges which were around from flak. I think I had two so from the 2mm flak, lots of other cartridges from carabines. Actually, interesting, when I was a kid, and I must have been 6 or 7, my parents bought a house, and of course we were playing all over the place, and we were digging around and stuff, and I came across kind of a container with pistol cartridges, and of course didn't know what it was. I put them in my pocket, ran around, and was happy that I had nice little heavy metal things. My parents were like shocked to see me with lots of ammunition running around. It was from one of the times, because the area where I grew up around Bautzen had quite heavy fighting in the last days, and I think one of the last big offenses or counter offenses, and so that's why the area I'm from, there was also lots of destructions. Still, I think like 15 years ago, they still dug up a few skeletons of soldiers in a sand pit. And of course, wherever you dig in Germany, you find like different bombs, mines, ammunition. It's a common thing. So yeah, I came across ammunition when I was learning in Dresden. I was in a Dresdner Forest or Dresdner Heide, and there were those big dumping places where they just dump stuff after the bombing, and I found also like parts of the incinerating bombs, the weight, and also like lots of cartridges. And in my kind of youthful carelessness, I actually opened quite a few cartridges and burned the what's called the powder which is inside. I was lucky not being blown up, but I have a cousin actually who lost parts of his hands with playing around with ammunition. So it's a common thing in Germany. There's, if you want, you find still those artifacts in many places, and you can do with it what you want. Also, when I grew up, driving around, you have still the kind of started Autobahns, even though most people know nowadays it was just a minor project, and a project which was already pre-planned prior to 33, and yeah, the Nazis just took it on as a good propaganda, how to say, piece that they would create work because unemployment was like really bad. But still, when you drive through Germany, you see areas where there are like cleared places in the forest, or you come across like construction for bridges, but because of the war, they never completed all the projects they had. Actually, also when I grew up in Eastern Germany, most of the Autobahn was still from the Third Reich. Of course, back then in the 1980s, 1990s, in very bad shape, and now they're redone, most of them, and it's falling apart again because the quality is way lower. So that's also an artifact. Or also when I was in Vienna, I saw the flag towers, quite impressive, and knowing that there are more of those structures like in Peenemünde or Usedom, where the Nazis built like giant concrete structures which pretty much can't be taken out of the world. Similar on the West Wall, on the Atlantic coast. One day I want to go there and just have a look at those places, the landing places, just to see what's going on. All right, so I mentioned Jordan Peterson, so let's maybe speak about some other things. How I came about this topic again. So I mentioned my dad. There's a YouTube channel called Military History Visualized. He's a proper Austrian again, but not this type of Austrian from back then, a modern Austrian, which is kind of dealing with this history. Lots of interesting military strategy things, especially how did the German military operated on a practical level. Similar, huge shout out to Tick or A.K. Lewis about his Courland series and Stalingrad series. I'm actually quite interested in, if I would have more time, to translate those into German and into Russian, because the value which is in there to see on a daily basis where the troops moved, kind of what were the backgrounds, what were the logistics, and things that happened around it with the population in those areas is quite interesting, and having like a really deep analysis of of all the participants and the propaganda which was going on both sides or all sides. It's really interesting. Then another channel which often brings stuff up and actually has the viewpoint from Peterson to a certain extent is Lex Friedman. I think he moved now to Texas. Was back then in Boston with MIT. Actually also comes from some Jewish background. He likes, in many of his podcasts, he brings up Hitler, and actually I would be very interested speaking with him about it, but he reached already such a level of popularity. He's probably never, he has more important things to do than talking to somebody like me about this topic. But hey, Lex, yeah, it would be really interesting trying to analyze some of those things in a more deeper level, how to deal with this part of history as a Russian Jew and as a kind of German or Central European person from modern times. Also, interestingly, sometimes I watch those Russian, or like also in Germany, you have those people who go to battle sites and dig out skeletons and kind of put trying to find like fallen soldiers and put them into rest. This also brings me back to another topic from my family. Recently, my dad digitalized a war letters from one of my I don't know if it's a cousin or it's probably somewhat related. Uh, this of a guy, he was like 19, also grew up doing the Nazi propaganda with Hitler Youth and everything, and he was like also fully into this whole heroic thing. And I think it was like 41, he was drafted into the army when things suddenly depleted after the beginning of Barbarossa. He was stationed for some time in France, had a good life there, was not didn't see any action, but then Stalingrad happened and he actually came into the vicinity of Stalingrad, and I don't know, it was like not more than 2 months or 3 months, he was dead because the retreats and everything. And it's interesting to see from this micro level how people were enjoying it back then. Of course, there was family tragic involved with this. He was the only son. The business deteriorated afterwards or didn't really continue. His sister had to carry on. She also was in a Russian concentration camp after the war, but it introduced, at least for me, or explained a bit more some of the more positive viewpoints some people have. Still, actually, it's also a big topic, and I actually don't know how much I should get into it. Shout out to Miles Power. He's currently dealing with Holocaust deniers and talking about chemical stuff. He's a chemist, and there's like a front of, I don't know, like 4 or 5 Holocaust deniers trying to sue him or threatening him with violence. I don't have currently, I didn't meet anybody like this, but I also have people in my family that are happy like little kids when they go somewhere and know like, oh yeah, like interesting, this was called like the Hitler place or something, because it was everywhere, and they're like really still proud that this was, and they can't see kind of the downsides from this regime, from this time. So yeah. Let's talk about this. So yeah, basically, in my early youth, I was introduced to all the militarism. Only saw like the kind of the fatalistic viewpoints, and probably for 15 years I didn't touch this topic much. And now I'm looking more into the politics and economics, and this I think is missing most in Germany. So there's all the time this focus on the end, the tragedy, and kind of those things, but almost no focus at all in economics. So and one book I'll probably go through next is Adam Tooze's Wages of Destruction. It will be interesting how I can digest this book, because actually I can show it. Because it's filled with data, and I know from the people which are opposed to a more thorough analysis of this topic, he's like for them on the blacklist. And yeah, it's also about 30 hours audio. But yeah, now I'm looking more into policies, economics, and yeah, maybe let's drink some more. I actually wonder if YouTube will allow me to upload a 2-hour video, but no, if it's a 2-hour video, maybe at one point, I know at the beginning of channels you only can upload 15 minutes, but I think I should have verified this channel already, so let's see if I can upload a bit longer video, because we already 1 hour. So I think my dad gave me this book, Anmerkungen to Hitler, comments to Hitler. Not actually. I have to reread it. Not sure what the gist of it is. Let's just quickly the index. Yeah, success, mistakes, and how do I say, Irrtümer. Yeah, like stupid things and atrocities. Another book which is also often mentioned a lot is Man's Search for Meaning. One guy who survived the concentration camps, psychology, how to do it. That's a book from which I really like because there's very little from the Eastern perspectives, at least for Germans. There's mainly about Germans. Of course, you get all the things from America, from the kind of milder form of the war in the West or in Italy and in Africa. Of course, still very bad. Many people died, but in comparison to the East, yeah, not as bad. So when I restarted looking into this topic, and actually, definitely, I really would like to do a comment about Richard Evans. I think I listened through 10 or 20 books, and when I came across those, very, very good, I think. Definitely, I want to put it more into perspective, and I actually wonder if there's a German historian or like a historian from Russia or from France or from America, which did something similar, and just to see which other points they emphasize more or how they approach this topic. Richard Evans, he is a British guy. I think his story is he came to Germany and was so surprised. I think, not sure if it was in the 80s or so. I think it was in the 80s or 90s. How people still were non-critical or actually proud of this time, and he started researching it more. And he had the trial with, or he was defending Pinguin against what's this guy's name? Yeah, David Irving, kind of one of the strange characters who has big fondness about the Austrian men, and not sure what's wrong with him. Actually, I think there's one story that he. I actually don't know how old it is, but he basically he's trying to sell history, but he's having positive fiction about this and leaving out all the bad parts, basically, from Nazi Germany. So yeah, be wary if you only consume him, and don't be shy to look into kind of the abyss as well. Actually, before I think it was like 5 years ago, when I was learning some Russian, I came across a guy from Russia that introduced me to Bloodlands from Timothy Snyder, and I probably should listen to it again as well. Different theory about how things happened, statelessness in the East due to German and actions from the UdSSR, brutalization and consequences of it. Oh, excuse me. It's already approaching 1:30. So yeah, Richard Evans, definitely. I think there are like 3-4 good videos about it, and I probably should watch them and then make a more. Try just to add to this, because just 4 videos about this book on YouTube is not. It's not good. All right, let me see. well, let's go through the books. I started on the books. So another book that really impressed me was Spare and Speer. And I probably should buy the Kindle version. I think it's currently £4 of his accounts. Of course, the whitewashed and stuff he leaves out. If I would have endless time, I probably would go through both of them again in parallel and see, what the nuances are. But then when I got deeper into the topic, I was thinking, okay, let's get a balanced library, and not only actually during the time, but also after the time. And there are definitely several very important individuals which were not giving up after the 50s, of letting go of this topic and pointing out basically Nazis in the German system, or people in hiding, or plain view hiding, which were not taken accountable, let's say, rigidly, which didn't have to suffer for their involvement of infliction of cruelties to people. So so that's definitely, there are a few people in there which are very important. Then there's this topic about Mein Kampf. There's this book called Mein Kampf, a critical edition, released 2016. Of course, Hitler was not the only guy writing stuff. I was trying to read Mein Kampf, and I had to give up. It goes on. It should be definitely, it should be given out more. Of course, Hitler was an orator person. He was not a writer, and his oratory and his performance of was his main essence of communicating and convincing people to or rallying the German nation towards his cause. So maybe at one point I will get this critical edition. I probably just want to see it first in the library, because also really thick, like 2,000 pages. I'm especially interested in the comments about what's written in there to the actual playing out of the Third Reich. Another book I just found, didn't even know I had it, Gestapo. There's so many books. It's just stuff I have here. Himmler is a big topic. Fortunately, no audiobook available. Also about Goebbels. Goebbels, you find some stuff, but not too much. But Himmler is a person, not yet. There's a 1,000-page book from Peter Longerich, whatever his name. He wrote, I don't have his name, sorry. Doesn't matter. Peter Longerich. He wrote several biographies of some high-ranking Nazi Germans. So I have to see. I have to stop probably. I'm trying to complete this topic towards the end of the year, and then move on to another topic, probably in history, or not history, medicine. I want to get back into Spanish and do some current stuff, because no point kind of dwelling on this topic for too much. Another thing I want to do is to see the presentation of this in context. So I got some British school books, and I'm actually surprised at which age they already introduce it, and which prominence this topic has. I think it's way bigger than the UdSSR, and of course it's very hard to pick your topics from history, what you teach in school, and I would be interested across like Europe or the globe, kind of which prominence this topic gets and which topics are mentioned or not, and then just present this to see kind of which different levels of insights exist around the globe. It's not a book, so most things I'm going to get on just on my Kindle because I don't have the library space. There are just a few books where the topic is mentioned. There is basically, let me see. So yeah, this is big one, Second World War, but we also have touching on this international migration, military strategy, international relations, politics, empire, and then 20th century Britain, and German literature. There's also a more recent one, but I haven't updated my library about Nazi Germany, which I'm going to add and just see kind of what's mentioned in it and what not. And also, of course, we have the nice market analysis. So there's kind of Bloodlands, post-war. So this is a book also this influenced me greatly, and I would like to see a book like post-war prior to this time, and then also from different viewpoints like Asia, Middle East, different places in Europe, America, South America. But of course, I know most countries don't have the capacity of having those scholars available and analyzing the topic in this depth. And then global Cold War, which kind of just followed out of it. I haven't done too much about Cold War, but maybe at one point. This is a good example about brief snippets in our time, and it probably would be also interesting to have, if the time would be available, but to have like a dark series about this, like just 45 minutes or 40 minutes, different topics from the time in the similar format with people which are knowledgeable about the topic, and just to have it for the record. Of course, history and stuff is happening nowadays as well, so it's really hard to keep track of what should be kept, what should be taught, or which should be preserved for the future or taught to the next generation, because for me that's one of my biggest questions, how to teach my kids about it, or how to introduce them to horrific topics, because nobody knows in which way the future will develop. And looking at history, it's more likely than not that something like this will repeat in some form again sooner or later. So it's no point beating around the bush and saying, oh yeah, it's progress all the way. It's lots of resets and hardship and how to say sorry, I can't come up with the English word for it. Understandability, how bad life goes for many people. So yeah, then I have the last one, history. So there's a series, What is History? From Clark. No, what's his? I forgot his name, sorry. So there's a series about what is history. Then Richard Evan wrote one, What is History Now? And another one is, Richard Evans wrote In Defense of History, and then a newer scholar, which is, I think, a grandchild from the first writer, wrote What is History Now? I want to get into this topic as well. It's probably more lighter and interesting because it covers different time periods. Should be more easier to deal with. Okay, so that's history musings. What got me into history was actually Napoleon and Napoleonic Age. A topic I definitely have to check out more. Also still quite controversial, but way, how to say, probably way easier to deal with than Nazi Germany. I'm quite aware of the things I present. I think I mentioned it already before. I just want to say it more clearly. Most people won't have the time or can't have the time to look into this topic in this depth because just looking at Richard Evans, it's 1,800 pages or something, close to 90 hours audible or something. So for most people, quite a big burden, and it's understandable that this topic actually drops more. Also, one reason why I want to know more about it is in Germany it's very easy to brandish people as Nazis, to call them out, to infiltrate organizations with kind of right-wing people, and then I call them media Nazis, basically, where people just basically silenced by calling them this, even though, or like in America, lots of people get called Hitler, even though they don't know actually what it entails, or and I won't be able to hold much of those streamings, but at least for me, if I will meet somebody who has an ear to listen or some time to think more about this topic, I will have some things to say. That's really so much about it. Then what's also interesting about this topic, how it's viewed from the German perspective, which is still for a long time with its particulars, and defeatism and apologetic and awkward relationship. It's interesting for me to see how the British handle it, and also see it in the continuity of kind of German unchanging view of history, because the German-speaking people were in Central Europe for a long time, but compared to a British history where you have the Celts, you have the Romans, you have the Anglo-Saxons, you have the Normans, you have the Danelaw, and then you have the British Empire. Germany was trying to get an empire, but never got there. But in Britain there was an empire, which is interesting to see what is upheld from this empire, or the thinking about the empire, which a problem Germany never had, because we never had so many colonies and power, at least over a long period of time. So those are my two viewpoints. Also interesting to see it from the Russian perspective, but due to my limited knowledge of the language, I haven't delved too deeply into it. But it will be definitely, if I have time, I will look into it more. Then, yes, I actually wanted to say which books I was listening to. The slight side criticism about Audible, so it only seems to list stuff to a year in the past, and other stuff I have to actually dig deeper. But anyway, it's only about a year ago when I started looking into this topic. What did we have? So I was listening to the end from Kershaw, 1944 to 45. Then a very bad book, The Germans in Normandy. Maybe better it's an actual book than an audio book, but it was jumping back and forth and context was not too much. Then I mentioned the Nuremberg trials from John and Anne Tusa. Very good introduction, I would say, but yes, ideally I would like to read the transcribes and see more references. Then we have, what did we have as next? So this was all earlier this year in May, and then I started like full with the 3 books from Kircher, The Coming of the Third Reich, end of August, then the Third Reich in Power in September, and then in October, Third Reich at War, then Ian Kircher, Hitler, I think I had it before, then a quite good comparison, but contrast between Stalin and Hitler from Lawrence Rees. Still on my list is To Hell and Back from Ian Kircher, which has some more perspective from the time of the First World War towards the end of the Second World War. There are also many interesting small accounts from people that surrounded the Nazi elite. Just as an example, I had Traudl Jung, one of the secretaries from Hitler. I think the 2 other secretaries of Hitler also wrote things. Maybe one day the chauffeur of Hitler, his security guy, the many people that were close to Hitler wrote things which gives like a more personal insight, what he knew or what he did or not. Also interesting would be Bormann's Hitler Table Talks. I actually haven't seen it anywhere, at least not on Amazon, but probably in one of the archives or libraries I will see it. Also definitely, if I have unlimited time, will be Goebbels diaries and other diaries. There is Viktor Klemperer. There is a German SPD guy. What's his name? I forgot his name. Also some diaries from the time, from people who suffered under the time and people who actually did all the ruling and misdeeds. From Frank, I heard he also has a big diary. I heard something about Goering's diary, but I'm not sure if it's a thing. Also partly interesting, the book Nazi Wives. Then I had Invading Hitler, which was from Roswell K. Doughty. This brought me, gave me the brain thought to have something like a Tick series, but just kind of picked out about a smaller event, but then something like Doughty's insight, strategy-wise, setup-wise, to know kind of what were the logistics, the thinkings, the planning, the resources from all different viewpoints to specific events. I mentioned already Rudolf Hösse's account about his involvement in the whole time. So about, I think, let me see if I have anything else on my list, at least from here. So it would be interesting to know which conclusions to draw from all of those insights or those readings, because many people criticize why do you spend so much time, so many resources on this topic. It's all history, but I think it's quite important to know history to understand where we are from. For instance, German education and rearing of kids is interesting. There's still the harshness, but nobody knows where it comes from. And there's this one woman who wrote the kind of definitive guide to rearing German children, and just kind of the brutalization of kids during this time, during the Third Reich, was interesting. Actually, I had one math teacher who was not giving it's called capital punishment, basically slapping kids. He just would go to like, he wouldn't give you a full hit, but he would go to just to give you like a wake up. And he also was like a guy from the Hitler Youth and was raised like with brutality and this whole kind of honor code, which is still somewhere there, and I actually can see it in some of my family members. And of course, nobody knows it's coming from. At least if you're not diving into the topic, you don't know that the seed or the kind of the anchorage for this topic is coming from those times. Similar, I studied forestry. Goering was a hunting guy, and we still, or at least in Germany, there is still the quite biased view of forestry and hunting from Goering's viewpoint, and it's already so ingrained, and it's a topic not too well known to many people. Of course, there are many, or quite a few, I would say, Nazi fans in the hunting, in the hunting field among the hunters. Let's put it this way, but it's also discussed only among people which are kind of positive for this topic, because it's one of those topics you need to know who to speak with and to enjoy it. Basically, nobody wants to speak about the topic and then hear like lots of criticism about it. Then yes, so that's what I'm doing. I'm listening to current stuff. I'm really looking forward to Shire's account, and so books I want to point out is post-war Richard Evans trilogy is really good. I don't know if I should look more about just from the war perspective on the war, even though I have about, I think still currently 20 books or 30 books about specific war events from different branches of the Army, Navy, Air Force, just accounts from them, and how they all were not involved in anything Holocaust related. It's interesting how this is all the time pointed out in most of those things, even though everybody was involved, because whoever was involved in the war in the East, it was given by command to most of the troops. Of course, there were some generals which were not passing down the order, but most of them did, and everybody was, or most people were involved in this total war of annihilation towards the East. Speer's book is a really good one. I have also one of the recent books, what's his name? It's Adams, about Churchill. Churchill is kind of a special case because he also wrote his history of the Second World War, which is still in print, very expensive, and I just would like to know, to get the diff of current scholarly stuff to things he was writing, just to know kind of where he was off, kind of where it's too glossy, and because he's still a big name for many people. Okay, so what I have this, which is kind of more the structure about this topic for me, about books I want to read. Books that were good, and thoughts about this topic, and then I have this small thing, and this about ideas for videos to go into more details about the stuff I mentioned just briefly in this video, which is already quite some time. Not sure who will have made it so far, but I think it will be interesting for me to look at it again and when I revisit this topic to see where I was, and to have like a more broad overview. Also interesting for me is the whole architecture point of view from the Third Reich, of practicalities and impracticalities, and actually foolishness of stuff people did back then. But of course, due to the not allowance of criticism towards the elite, lots of things went out of hand. Especially, I'm kind of thinking of getting Hoss's book as well. It's interesting how he puts blame to many different things and blames people of blaming other people. It's just a very interesting piece of writing, and probably have to see if there are other accounts which balance his viewpoint a bit more. In the account or the book I listened to, there were also two summaries from his hearings, which were interesting, which described him, what he said, what he thought about himself. But yeah, the whole Nazi Germany topic is very vast, and I just want to leave some things to think about it again, or to leave for the people that come after me to hear what like a more normal guy or a more general person says about this topic, which touching points were there, and what might have one thought about this topic. So so that's me. 1 hour and 42 minutes. I'm quite happy that I got around to doing this. And I will see how many books I will analyze in this series, or topics revisit, because it's so vast, and it still touches us nowadays, and we shouldn't forget about it. And so that's all, and hopefully not again, but I don't want to set illusions that human nature is very irrational and unlogical and compulsive and destructive at times, and only the future will tell and show kind of with what for kind of nonsense and carnage we will come up. So yeah, see you then, I would say. Over and out.